Okay, good morning. So let's get started. So my name is Lorenzo Pupillo and I run the Cybersecurity Accepts initiative here at CEPS. Today we will talk about the fallout from the CrowdStrike outage. On July 19, the world experienced what is known as the Blue Friday. 8.5 million PC screens worldwide were hit by the infamous bull screen of death, a critical error message displayed by Microsoft Windows when the system encounters a serious issue from which it cannot recover. This unprecedented outage was triggered by a faulty update from CrowdStrike, a leading cybersecurity provider, which led to widespread system crashes. The disruption affected government services, emergency operation, transportation, payment system, and financial market in major countries like the Netherlands, UK, Germany, India, and the US. While this incident was not a cyber attack, its scale was historic and raised two major concerns. First of all, the failure stemmed from an update from CrowdStrike, a software meant to protect networks from threat. Second, fix the problem required manual intervention, rebooting each computer into Windows safe mode and applying a patch. This was an immensely time-consuming process for millions of devices. So, how did it happen? CrowdStrike is not a new kid on the block in the field. It's a trusted cybersecurity company serving over half of the Fortune 500 companies, with a track record in investigating major incidents, such as the 2014 Sony Pictures hack and the exposure of Hillary Clinton email 2016. A software update, like the one that caused the incident, can access the Windows operating system in two modes: through a restricted user space, where applications run with limited access to all hardware and system resources, or through a kernel space, where access is unrestricted. In case of a failure, while in the first case an incident causes the individual application to terminate, but the system is not affected, when in the kernel mode, failure of the software stops not only the application, but also leads to termination of the whole system, and we got the famous blue screen of death. CrowdStrike updates its security software automatically and silently at the kernel level of the operating system, implying that if an error occurs, the cascade effect can be heavy. This approach is followed to have all your target updated as soon as possible. The erroneous CrowdStrike content file injected in the Windows system generated the crash on July 19. It is important to mention that according to some experts, CrowdStrike is not the only security company to generate Windows crashes, and that what happened is nothing new except for the scale of this event related to the great diffusion of Windows operating system. Now, what are the industry policy implications? This incident illustrates the systemic fragility of the core internet infrastructure and point out to many specific critical issues. First one is the software monoculture. Unlike industries where consumers enjoy variety, like the car industry, for instance, the software industry converges towards uniformity. Most individual business users, thanks to strong network effect, prefer using the same operating system, like Microsoft Windows. This has benefit: ease of management, larger support networks, and more compatible products. However, this software monoculture can lead to cascading disruption when something goes wrong. In other words, the positive network externality becomes negative. The more numerous are the systems that rely on the same software and cybersecurity solution, the greater the potential impact of any serious malfunction. The security company CrowdStrike provides to Microsoft a security product, the Falcon system, that blocks attacks on Microsoft Windows. This incident underscored the danger of concentrating critical services in the hands of just a few cybersecurity companies. Government and corporation alike must rethink their reliance on a narrow set of providers and diversify their software solution to avoid widespread outages. However, this event highlights the unpreparedness of many organizations to handle large-scale outage. Best practice like recovery mechanism. If an update goes wrong, the software knows how to revert itself to the latest working version. Defensive programming, contingency plan, and redundancy. All measures should be implemented. The second big issue is the one of automated software update. The faulty update by CrowdStrike was done automatically through the kernel of the Microsoft operating system, and this generated a system failure. Now, software user may ask for changes in this operating mode. This case shows that pushing update without IT intervention is unsustainable. This issue, however, is more complex and reminds to the more general question on how to balance interoperability and cybersecurity. Indeed, in 2009, Microsoft, in consultation with the EU regulator, voluntarily agreed to open its Windows Vista operating system, making changes to its security by building kernel-level application programming interface so that third-party security vendors could have access to part of this operating system to offer security products and services. The opening of this software to third-party vendors by Microsoft has generated a market for endpoint security, today is worth about $15 billion, with numerous competing companies such as CrowdStrike, Trellix, and so on. Some experts claim that mandating interoperability of the operating system with security vendors' products while increasing the contestability of the market also has negative implications for security. Therefore, it becomes very critical how the APIs are designed especially to be resilient and interoperable in view of promoting a multiplicity of security space. So today, I think we will have a bunch of very important issues to discuss, and I think what we should try to do today to try to satisfy this desire of great transparencies that I think policymaker, consumer company have to try to, because we are always saying, we are always more connected, being connected give us benefit, but also there are some negative effect. The problem is that we should be try to manage this potential negative effect. Otherwise, some people will say, well, it's better maybe to go back, not to use a manual system, maybe, even the paper, as has been done, like for instance, in England, when there have been this attack, to the hospital and so on. So today, we have a very, very interesting panel. Unfortunately, I have to say the Christian D'Acunha from the European Commission, probably because of his job, because in charge of the task force on managing crisis at the European Commission, he cannot come, but will be connected in person in about 15 minutes, at least, to present the view of the Commission on this issue. So I would like to start calling to the podium the different speakers. We have Mo Cashman, Field Chief Technology Officer from EMEA. You can sit down here. From Trellix. Then we have connected remotely Bernold Newsteg. It's co-founder of the Center for the Law of Economic Cybersecurity at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam. He will present the view on academic on this issue. Then we have Claudia Canel Quaroni, Senior Policy Manager at the Computer and Communication Industry Association of Brussels. Please take a seat. Then we have Martin Michelot, Executive Director for Europe of the TIC Council. TIC is an international...
What an entrance.
Sit down there, over there. Thanks. Yes. TIC is the International Association representing independent testing, inspection, certification companies. And then we'll have connected remotely Christian D'Acunha in a little while. Just a few... this event, it's video streaming, and it's on the record. We'll start in this way. Each speaker will have about 8 minutes to make an initial statement on this issue, and then we'll open the discussion among the speakers and also with the audience. So I would like to give the floor to Mo Cashman. He's an enterprise architect and appointed principal engineer at the Trellix. Mo inspired next generation security professionals and advised Trellix largest global customers on how to make security an enabler for their business. Mo passion is to change the way we think about measure and operate security system. With that passion and over 20 years of experience, Mo currently leads development effort in security effectiveness, testing, value, measurement, integrated security system design. Mo was the Chief Security Officer for the global public sector and just prior to joining Trellix led a large computer security incident. Okay, so I would like to ask Mo, because also probably it's, it's one of the most knowledgeable person from a technical standpoint, maybe to present better than what I could do. I mean, what really happened with this in this case.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I actually think you did a pretty excellent job of describing what happened, right? And basically, it comes down to different type of architecture, right? On how the different products work, and in this case, updates that were that had to go directly into the kernel for the right level of visibility that was required to detect that particular, we'll say, threat that they were targeting with the update was faulty, basically, right? But the risk is not really necessarily just in the content update. I think it's also in the architecture, right? The product architecture. So you mentioned the user space versus the sensitive kernel space, and I think a lot of people are now getting education on those terms more than they probably wanted to over the years. But the update basically executed things, and you mentioned a few things about not being controlled, and that's also one of the areas of risk. So if the updates can't be controlled, maybe a user doesn't have the choice to say, I don't want to detect that particular threat, or it's not important to me, but there wasn't a choice there, and it was basically happening about 10 to 12 times a day. So if you think about that level of risk times, times 365, 30, 40,000 times a year, if you put it in that kind of context. So the risk is really about different product architectures and how they're updated, and the choice that users of that software, organizations need to have, let's just say, in whether they want to deploy those right away. Some organizations will do testing. I know a lot of defense organizations, a lot of high risk adverse companies will do a lot of different types of testing for those updates. And if the makers of the software, in this case, are not able to give that transparency, that produces some risk, more supply chain risk than is necessary. So I think some of those things will be changed, right? There'll definitely be procedural changes that will occur for, we'll say, trying to put in more fault tolerance there. But nonetheless, the architecture is still there. And it speaks to your point about, well, IT supply chain, IT security supply chain in this case, we shouldn't be a risk. We need to take that responsibly. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Now, I would like to give the floor to Bernold. Bernold is the co-founder of the Center for Law and Economics of Cybersecurity at Erasmus University of Rotterdam. He has all kind of activity besides teaching, holds the monthly webinar Cybersecurity Booster. He is presented the Cybersecurity Booster talk show. He obtained in 2013 a degree in law at Utrecht University and system engineering, policy analysis and management at Delft University of Technology, and his doctorate in law and economics for cybersecurity at the European Doctor of Law and Economics at Erasmus University. So, Bernold, what is, as an academic, what is your view on this outage and what should be done?
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. A slight delay, but if there's no discussion, that's no problem. I will give a perspective which is a little bit more high level, as is probably expected from an academic standpoint. And for me, this incident, this CrowdStrike incident, is closely connected also to deliberate cybersecurity risks. And in the end, I think we need to also to relate it to our addiction to efficiency, because in our society we have a very big addiction to efficiency, and I think we need to break that. Because in recent years, already since, for example, the COVID pandemic, it has become clear that maximum efficiency doesn't always work well. There were too few ICU beds, for example, in the Netherlands during the COVID pandemic, because we love efficiency in healthcare. And now we see there aren't enough shells in stock to send to Ukraine, because the Dutch military, I'm speaking about the Dutch society, but it's pretty more broadly connected also to the European views. We don't have sufficient shells to send to Ukraine because we love efficiency. And I think this love for efficiency should also be connected to the internet, because the internet, I think we all need to be aware, has long ceased to be a haven for creativity alone. And the internet is now subject to an intense political struggle as well. China and the United States are competing for control over our digital world. And I think personally that our freedom and health are at stake. And the response from our bloc, so to say, the European Union, has been weak on this subject. And one of the solutions is to kick down on our efficiency addiction as our primary value. A little less efficiency is fine, but not a lot of people, not a lot of policymakers seem to realize that, in my perspective. And this past summer, of course, an error in CrowdStrike security software, we already discussed, the previous speaker discussed it perfectly, caused a global outage in the Windows computers, including, for example, Dutch hospitals. And also a few weeks ago, it was revealed that the Dutch ethical hacker could disable millions of solar panels from the company Enphase. Enphase is a producer of solar panels, and especially the inverters that bring the solar energy to the electricity grid. And a hack on these inverters could have toppled the entire European energy system, because this is a very fragile system. And the ease with which CrowdStrike software updates could be automatically pushed through Windows was deemed more important than double-checking the software. And the convenience of connecting solar panels to the internet is valued more than the potential risk of massive power outages, as we all like to see how much energy we're generating on a sunny day in the case of these solar panels. And of course, the examples we discussed today, we have examples of insufficient testing, maybe a human error in the case of CrowdStrike, and we have an example of a vulnerability that can be fixed, but also can be exploited by cyber criminals, potentially, in the case of Enphase. But what I would like to stress, and this obviously didn't happen at CrowdStrike, but it should be a wake-up call, that these major incidents or major potential incidents, such as the Enphase vulnerability, could also be deliberately caused by, for example, United States and China, which control obviously large parts of our infrastructure. For example, I found this a very interesting example. A few weeks ago, there was the news that the Chechen leader Kadyrov, you probably all know of him, complained that Elon Musk had shut off his Cybertruck. Of course, we can all laugh about Kadyrov crying about his disabled Cybertruck. But if Elon Musk really did that, it might be funny at first, but couldn't he not also turn off all our Teslas? And can't the US government force Musk to do so in, for example, a national security situation? Who can say for certain that the United States hasn't built a backdoor into Microsoft or won't compel Microsoft to push certain updates for US geopolitical interests? And regarding the solar inverters, the Chinese solar inverters, there is a real risk that China can spy on us and shut down the inverters also. So for me, the CrowdStrike incident stresses that we are increasingly dependent on technology that, if wielded by a geopolitical actor, which, as we know right now, wasn't the case with CrowdStrike, with malicious intent, it could pose even more serious risks. So the question is, what is our answer to this situation? Of course, in the European Union, we want to create our own digital champions who can compete. But the current situation is, in most areas, they really can't. And if a successful company does emerge, it's quickly bought. So, for example, Gaia X is an initiative for a European cloud. But it has become more of a talking platform with little action. So only if we are truly willing to think outside the box, we can achieve our goals. And with regards to CrowdStrike, with regards to the solar panels, but especially the risks that geopolitical actors cause, I think the elephant in the room, and the thing I want to put into the discussion, is that we need to kick off of our addiction to efficiency. And this means concretely that we must start using more systems without these cyber risks, these geopolitical cyber risks, even if it means they don't work as well as systems that have these risks. And that would be my contribution and my insight regarding the CrowdStrike incident. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernold. I like, the concept of addition to efficiency. I would like to come back to this issue because I would like to connect this to the needs maybe of having more redundant networks, to approach this. But now I don't know if Christian D'Acunha is connected. Probably not yet, because he told me, that he was going to connect around this time. But okay, maybe we can move forward. So I would like now to give the floor to Claudia. Claudia, sorry, but we have Claudia Quaroni is a senior policy manager at the Computer Communication Industry Association in Brussels. She's responsible for privacy, content moderation, advertising, and the protection of minors online. Before joining CCIA in 2023, Claudia served as a director at Brussels-based consultancy, where she specialized in platform liability, content moderation, e-commerce, copyright, and audiovisual media policy. Claudia holds a degree in political science, one in sociology, brought from Madrid, Carlos III University, and completed a postgraduate course in public policy. Claudia, what is your view on this big outage?
Thanks, Lorenzo. So as we know, the CrowdStrike software update caused significant global disruptions and complete chaos around the world. It grounded flights. It made it impossible for banks to perform transactions. It canceled hospital appointments, locked out a lot of people out of their own computers, and made it significantly more difficult for everyone, or a lot of people, to perform their daily tasks during almost an entire day. And this is without taking into account all the time it took for normalcy to resume. And millions of people and businesses ultimately paid a high price for a simple glitch that resulted in a system-wide outage. For the company as well, it also meant receiving an overwhelming amount of requests from users, businesses, services, and even all the single devices flagging the failures in their products and services. If we already knew how important the technology infrastructure that underpins our digital world was, This was further proof of how intertwined this infrastructure is with our everyday life and how much it can affect it. I was recently talking to a friend of mine that works in the risk management in the workplace, and he was complaining a little bit about how his job is somewhat invisible and how nobody notices if he's doing a good job unless there is a problem and then all eyes turn on him. And I think this is somewhat similar to what happens with infrastructure such as the one that was developed by CrowdStrike and other cybersecurity and cloud service providers. As long as everything runs smoothly, nobody even needs to know the name of these companies, but as soon as there's a problem, everybody comes to know about them pretty quickly, and the consequences are extensive, both for the company, but also for the organizations that rely on them, and ultimately for the consumers. I believe the CrowdStrike incident showed us that how relying on a single vendor carries significant security risks. And in the EU, we should take this as a bit of a wake-up call and think deeply about how we can diversify our tech ecosystem and our reliance on different vendors, avoiding, therefore, market concentration and consolidation. Even one CrowdStrike executive questioned the fact, the over-reliance on a single vendor when he said, and I have to read here because I don't know the quote by heart, that organizations handling all their IT systems to a single vendor meant that the building materials, the supply chain, and even the building inspector were all the same, which is why it's important to develop and deploy software in a manner that reduces risks by diversifying providers. On a more practical level and translated into policy, the EU would need to continue working towards establishing a regulatory and competition environment that is open and dynamic and conducive to the presence of multi-vendor strategies, or in this case, multi-cloud providers for both private and public customers, from single citizens to big and small organizations and even institutions. We sadly see a lot of locking practices which should be dealt with at the policy and regulatory level with the provisions that are already in place. For example, by properly enforcing the cloud provisions in the Data Act. Because there's no question that high concentration and monopolization leaves us all at risk. This would also mean tackling unfair software licensing practices, which is especially true not only for the biggest organizations, but also for SMEs, which have started their cloud transition journey using basic productivity software. If we look at the Commission's Digital Decade Policy Program, by 2030, 75% of European SMEs should adopt cloud strategies and technologies. However, if we take a look at the latest report on the state of the digital decade from 2024, we see that we're only halfway there. And according to a recent research that was conducted by Savanta and commissioned by CCIA, where they surveyed IT decision makers from 5 EU countries, and despite a desire of choice, when asked about cloud switching, almost 1 out of 2 cloud customers surveyed said that existing software licensing terms were what prevented them from switching cloud providers. The people surveyed also mentioned that familiarity as well as existing software discounts were the factors that really had a lot of weight when deciding which cloud provider to opt for. This without even mentioning that there have been several complaints made to European competition authorities on anti-competitive licensing practices. Here, introducing more competition in the tech infrastructure would help shift the mindset of cloud consumers away from a single vendor mentality, which would help as well reduce the risk of having a single point of failure. An open and competitive cloud and tech infrastructure market should therefore be prioritized at the EU level in order to build a greater security resilience. And shifting away from this single vendor mentality would also lead to increasing security and resilience, much more than, for example, say, mandating companies from reporting all of the incidents that they witness and their systems. For the internet infrastructure to work properly, it is important that the building blocks function. And in this case, diversification of the vendors is important. I'm aware that this is not a groundbreaking statement, but I feel like we often forget how important it is for the basic infrastructure to work properly and that we all rely on. We do have the tools to create a more dynamic and competitive tech ecosystem. And the regulatory landscape is already there. We have a lot of EU tools such as the NIS2, CRA, the Data Act. It is just a matter of focusing on enforcing the rules that we already have and allowing competition to flourish. As Lorenzo was mentioning, my background is a little bit more on privacy. And here in the space, we've seen a lot of competition and data protection privacy authorities work hand in hand in the latest months. So maybe an open question, so some food for thought here would be, shouldn't we make sure that also competition and security regulatory authorities work together to make sure that we have a diversified tech ecosystem that ultimately prevents market concentration and consolidation? Thanks.
Thanks. Now, let's give the floor to Martin Michelot. Martin is the Executive Director of the Tech Council Europe, where he leads the organization advocacy work towards the European Union and coordinates global advocacy on product testing and certification issue. It's a graduate in International Relations and European Affairs for Sciences Po. Michelot was previously Deputy Director of European Institute for European Policy, a Prague-based think tank focusing on European affairs, where he provides strategic advice to government on various issues. He has also worked for the Institute Jacques Delors, the German Marshall Fund, the United States, and the Brookings Institution in various research positions on transatlantic relations and European integration issues. So, Martin, what is your view on this outage, but also what is the role that, the organization that you serve, like the core, like the certification testing could have in this, to avoid this type of outage?
Thank you very much. Sorry. And thank you very much for the invitation. I have to say that I feel left out in a way because my laptop and my organization was not affected by CrowdStrike. I don't know how many of you have been, but when I read the news, of course I logged in on Twitter in the morning and I saw the news and I was like, oh, come on, I feel like I've been left out. Anyway, how many of you know the tech sector here? Show of hands, except my colleagues. Okay, so it's a very small amount, and I think that's actually quite significant. And it shows a lot of sort of what are the unknown screws in the digital economy that we don't necessarily think of or that we take for granted. To continue an analogy, I often say that the tech sector is sort of a referee in a football game. You never hear about him or about her unless he or she made a mistake, and that's very much the tech industry, because we provide services for safety, for security, for cybersecurity of consumer products, industrial products across the whole world. And really, you don't pay much attention necessarily to the little logos that are on the charger of your laptop. But that being said, these are companies, the members that the Tech Council represents, that do play a key role in ensuring the cybersecurity of consumer products, of value chains. They also play a key role, for example, in certifying the cybersecurity practices of companies via internationally recognized schemes. And what's important to say in this context as well is that when a tech company provides a certification, they also take on the liability of if anything happens. And that's something that I want to highlight. So in a way, the tech companies really are there to help facilitate innovation in a safe and secure way on the basis of existing internationally recognized standards, on the basis of private schemes. And what I want to do here today is sort of make the case for greater industry cooperation, and also for the greater preparedness of the industry. And maybe just a few words why the tech sector is actually relevant to help the industry and to help prevent these future issues. TIC members have historically implemented voluntary cybersecurity certification programs, such as those that are based on ETSI EN 303645, They are preparing pilot programs for compliance with the Radio Equipment Directive, and they're also preparing for cyber certification under the future CSA schemes, or also IEC 62443, common criteria. I mean, there is a lot that the tech sector does to help industries be compliant in terms of cybersecurity, either for good practices, when the industry, the manufacturer wants to show that it adheres with those standards, or for regulatory reasons, such as in the case of the Radio Equipment Directive or the Cyber Resilience Act in the European Union. And I can go even beyond that, because just a few days, one of our largest members has actually issued its first certificate for an ethically responsible application with artificial intelligence. And this certification actually addresses many ethical aspects of the development and the use of autonomous intelligent systems. And why am I giving you these examples? Is because of the fragmentation of the cybersecurity and even of the, to a certain extent, of the AI world. There is, we do see, or the members of Tech Council do see that there is an issue with compliance and with the preparedness of industries to satisfy with standards, and that ranges from SMEs to large, very large companies who put out dozens of products on the market on a monthly basis. And that's something we try to address at Tech Council by running a hackathon. We did an intercomparison between the laboratories of our members on the basis of a virtual device and testing the device against 67 of the most relevant provisions of EN 303645. And actually, I'm not afraid and scared to say that when we had 6 labs doing the testing, we had approximately 1/3 of alignment internally within our member laboratories on the 67 provisions. And we did that twice this year with different laboratories. That shows that there is an issue with the standard. That shows that there is an issue with the possible interpretation of the clauses of the standard. And if you have cybersecurity experts like the ones that we have in our laboratories that reach widely different conclusions, you can imagine how complicated this may be for a cybersecurity engineer in a small or in a medium-sized firm who is working on the compliance of a product, of an application. And so this is the sort of issues we want to address. We're already working internally on our own alignment in order to ensure that for customers, there is the easy repeatability and durability of the tests that are being provided. So I just wanted to take this step back already just to show that the market at the moment is extremely fragmented, and the CrowdStrike issue is in a way an outlier, in given what I'm discussing, but I still think it's rather symbolic of sort of this Wild West in terms of standards, in terms of schemes, and in terms of compliance within the industry, which is why the European Commission has tried to address this via the Cybersecurity Act schemes, via the Cyber Resilience Act, via the Radio Equipment Directive. To go a little bit more then into the CrowdStrike issue itself, and perhaps a bit the over-reliance on providers. Firstly, I will betray the fact that I work for an international trade association, and this was mentioned also by previous speakers, but the global impact of this issue really underscores the urgent need for enhanced international cooperation on cybersecurity, and that goes beyond the EU-US discussions that CEPS has hosted quite a few times. Here, it seems very clear to us as practitioners that policymakers must really foster the adoption of internationally accepted standards to help create a more secure and resilient digital environment worldwide. But this good practice starts at home, and indeed, the delay in the adoption of harmonized standards for European cybersecurity legislation is also something that hampers the creation of a level playing field for cybersecurity in Europe. Obviously, manufacturers, the TIC sector itself can create private schemes for certification when there are demonstrated needs. But there is also another demonstrated need, which is to make cybersecurity accessible to all, and again, to create this level playing field in the EU and globally to allow innovation to happen safely. And I'm fully aware there are lots of discussions in the standardization world, which may not sound sexy when you speak about it like this, but is hugely important on the leadership of standardization organizations. And at the risk of sounding naive, the global and completely undiscriminated impact of CrowdStrike really shows the need to get over this issue of leadership in standardization organizations. And lastly, I'll stop here, as threats evolve, legislation also must evolve. Obviously not to overregulate and not to go into the over-efficiency that was mentioned by the previous speaker, but to ensure that we have the right mechanisms to safeguard data, privacy, and the resilience of devices for both consumers and businesses. And here I of course want to end by highlighting the preparedness and the readiness of the tech industry to cooperate with industry, with regulators, to share the results that we have in the testing laboratories. One of the examples that we see as being the most prominent in compliance is the risk analysis that manufacturers have to carry out before they put a product on the market. That's a responsibility under the Cyber Resilience Act, but it also seems to be one of the most complicated and most danger-fraught processes before putting a product on the market. And I can happily and easily imagine that whenever that whenever the update was pushed out, there was no sort of thought on what could the unintended effects of failure be. And this is really the sort of, in a way, new world that manufacturers who are putting devices on the market need to adapt to. I'll stop here and we can discuss the over-reliance on single providers a bit later.
Thanks, Martin. We will come back to some of the issues you mentioned later. Now, because also I know that Bernard in a few minutes has to leave us for another webinar, I want to just, Bernard, go back to the issue that you mentioned, addition to efficiencies. What are your suggestions, for the industry? I mean, one of the things that struck me was that, for instance, Delta, out of this outage, had a damage of about, has been estimated, of about $500 million. Okay? Now, I think this is enough money to definitely almost create a second network, for the, or, to have a redundancy. So what do you think? What are your suggestions to try to solve possibly this trade-off between security and efficiency? We cannot hear you. We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now? Yes. This is the classical. I think we will never learn how to unmute ourselves. I think, yeah, at least at least myself. Well, thank you, and also thanks. I forgot to say for being invited, because there are very interesting perspectives on this topic I have already heard. So I'm very glad to be invited. And unfortunately, at 12 o'clock, I have to host a webinar on cyber insurance, which is also a very important topic to distribute knowledge. But on Delta. It's, by the way, interesting to read. You can find it online, the discussion between CrowdStrike, the lawyers of CrowdStrike, and the lawyers of Delta, or the CEO of Delta, because they had a very interesting discussion on solving this issue. It's a bit too broad to discuss right now, but you should look that up. It's a very interesting letters that are like legal letters that are put on X I think by CrowdStrike because they were a little bit tired about the reaction of Delta. But I think the important distinction here is the distinction between efficiency and effectiveness, because you can be effectiveness is actually achieving the right goals you want to achieve, and efficiency is going to that goal with as little means as possible. But I think what Delta did was just going to they were very maybe efficient, but not very effective. If you look at because they didn't have sufficient procedures and measures in place to cope with the CrowdStrike outage. I think this is also clear with regards to this letter, but that is put on X, has been put on X. But the main thing is that also with regards to the potential geopolitical risks that are only increasing, that there needs to be a discussion also on a European level. Do we want to trade some of the efficiency in order to achieve effectiveness in terms of protection of our health and our security? And I don't see that discussion currently happening, because efficiency since the 1990s, it's such a high value in our society. It's very hard to leave efficiency for individuals, but also for countries. So I am looking to. I think the first step is to increase the awareness on the fact that we maybe need to trade off some efficiency in order to achieve more effectiveness with regards to protecting our health and our security. I leave it to that.
Thank you very much. So I would like to now follow up on this trade of the efficiency and security. So
I really support what Bernard is saying. There was a book called Team of Teams, written by Stanley McChrystal, who was a famous commanding general, and he had a quotation about efficiency, about Frederick Winslow Taylor, and how the over-rotation to efficiency was good in the beginning, but when to combat current threats, that kind of mentality couldn't be maintained, and adaptability was more of the goal than efficiency when it comes to a resilient mindset and a resilient outcome. And I also want to highlight that the platform concentration risk is getting real. And here's a real practical example of efficiency. I deal with a lot of organizations, and I'll say this: Microsoft and Google Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace pretty much have 100% of the office productivity market, right, in almost every business. Microsoft embeds a lot of security capability now in Defender, in the endpoints, in email, in their systems. That's a good thing, but it's not a good thing when the organizations that, the CISOs in organizations, the security architects, those guys, they have to justify buying and wanting to diversify security because the leadership is all about efficiency. And when security is part of the license, that's okay. It's already there, turn it on. And they basically have to justify the need to be more resilient, to diversify security solutions across, for example, these critical systems that in particular affected Delta and many other industries, server environments that are running the applications that power the business. Why not diversify into another provider? But the mindset of efficiency only means, okay, let's just put the same thing on everything. We'll even outsource it to be managed and monitored by somebody else. So there's a mindset in organization leadership that says, I'm tend to outsource the risk a little bit, even though they can't, right? They're saying, oh, this is more efficient than looking for other ways to do this, looking for other modularity or module solutions to do this. So this is affecting pretty much every enterprise that is out there. There isn't a day that goes by that I do not have that conversation with some organization. We already have Microsoft, and I'm not saying that the technology is bad. I'm not. It's more about the lack of choice that organizations are being faced with, especially those that are charged with either testing or buying or implementing additional security solutions. They have to justify the need to do it differently. because of the efficiency mindset that is pervasive in critical infrastructure and in industries all over Europe, all over the world, really.
Thank you very much. I actually tend to agree with everything that's been said. I mean, yeah, I really like the most point regarding the need for adaptability more than focusing on just efficiency. And also what Bernal was mentioning, that efficiency should not be an end goal in itself, but it's more about the efficacy and effectiveness of the measures that have been taken. I don't know if I can expand much more on that, but yeah, I tend to agree completely. Yep.
Well, just to take a tiny step back, at the end of the day, compliance has a cost. It just depends on who's going to pay it, and efficiency also may have a cost. I mean, if we push too much towards this efficiency, if there is in a way too much liberty in terms of the cybersecurity regulations that govern the placement of a product or software on the market, you may face the unintended consequences of the examples that we speak about on a daily basis on cybersecurity breaches of various public institutions, la-di-da-di-da. I'm not going to go into that. And this may actually hamper what the European legislations or global recommendations have been put in place for. So yes, I entirely agree that efficiency can be in a way the devil in the details, and I think humbly that some of the European legislation that has been put in place, but also cybersecurity legislation in the UK, in Australia, Singapore, Vietnam, the IoT mark for the United States. These are trying to address some of these challenges that we see, especially for the high risk and the critical risk applications, which are the ones that have the biggest impact on the daily life of consumers, of companies, of public services. So indeed, there is something to be said about this. But for me, it just goes back to what I was saying when I started answering the question is someone at some point will have to pay the cost of compliance. It doesn't matter whether it's the manufacturer or the tech sector in a way, but we'd rather it not be the customer or the end user himself or herself.
Okay. Well, now, one issue, I mean, related to this question of the efficiency is, we mentioned before this need of breaking this model, the over-reliance on single provider, okay? But quite often, as also Mo was saying, this company have a huge portion of the market, okay? So becomes almost a necessity, for some, of this client, to rely on them. So what can be done to really help company to create, a broader opportunities in terms of choice?
What can be done in terms of organizational security? Well, I think one thing, the topic of diversification is very important. I think Claudia hit that earlier and mentioned that in the beginning. So looking at different ways to secure different types of systems, having different, we'll say, product architectures and capabilities. So for example, over the last, let's say, 5 to 8 years, there was a very big over-rotation, or at least a heavy rotation towards cloud-only solutions or solutions delivered via a SaaS, software as a service model. And again, towards the efficiency piece, there was an impression that that was more cost-effective, more efficient. Maybe we can argue that as well, because there's now a rotation back, partially because of the CrowdStrike incident, a rotation back towards, well, maybe there's an over-reliance on software as a service delivery model, but also was there really an efficiency gain by moving everything to infrastructure as a service, for example. And that's really a big issue today because the cost savings may not be there, right, over time. But having different types of architectures that allow you to security solutions that allow you to deploy things differently, to control your updates, to provide different levels of security, we'll say different types of modules that allow you to adapt, to different types of threats is important, but it's also important for your overall, not just your overall effectiveness, but your overall organizational resilience. So if you have a modular capability that is sort of hybrid between SaaS and be able to deploy in different types of environments today, it's been a mention about critical infrastructure or industrial security. A lot of times those types of systems can't even access software as a service, or in a government or military situation, they can't access those environments, so they have to use other things. And that becomes really important. Having the choice between SaaS and we'll say a hybrid security solution becomes very important. And those are really practical things, and those are available today. But those pressures of organizational efficiency really are hampering that a bit, I'd say.
I mean, I think I already mentioned during my speech that, yeah, I'm in a concentrated market, but yeah, of course. But yeah, fully agree. And having this choice where you can also veer away from over-relying on a single provider would also avoid having this whole system failures, because maybe only one part of the system would fail and then the others could back it up. This would be really important. But also giving consumers and users the choices on what the kind of software updates they want, whatnot. I think Mo spoke about it a little bit earlier and much better than what I can, because it's much more technical. But yeah, this would be crucial as well.
Yeah, quickly on this point. Obviously, my answer will not surprise you, but I think the focus, besides the benefits from a competition standpoint, the focus should be on ensuring that actually the providers meet the highest standards, because high competition doesn't always mean quality of competition, unfortunately. So really this is about ensuring that the service providers have qualified professionals, that they adhere to the strictest security requirements, and that they are adaptable to emergent threats. And yeah, in order to achieve this, this actually requires continuous collaboration and exchange of knowledge between various stakeholders in the cybersecurity ecosystem, academics, manufacturers, tech companies, the service providers themselves. But again, I go back to this issue, and I apologize if I sound like a broken record, but of the actual standards that govern the qualifications of the people, and the ability of the authorities in charge to set the rules, to say this is what is important for our provider, and this is how it can be checked. Without this, without a functioning, in a way, market surveillance authority, without a properly functioning competition authority, there is very little that can be done to ensure, beyond the free hand of the market, to ensure that we don't fall in the same pitfall with the over reliance on single providers as we've seen in the past.
I have quite a few questions, but maybe we can open the discussion now. I don't know if there are questions from the audience. Otherwise, I will.
If I may also, in the meantime, while the audience warms up, I completely agree with what Martin was mentioning about the need for enhanced preparedness, not only within the companies and through defensive programming, etc., but also preparing the consumers and the customers themselves, and making them aware of the risks that exist, and the cooperation among the different stakeholders in the whole system and process. It's just fundamental to have a cooperation cooperation between the companies, but also with institutions, making them aware of what is there and what can be done to prepare and prevent such incidents.
Okay, so I will follow up with some additional issue here. On this issue of the standard, the role also surveillance authority in general, not to the role of legislation because we will come on this later, but for instance, we know that in Europe we have the Digital Market Act, and we read almost every day, some action from the Commission on asking operator to open up the system, to be interoperable, for instance, to make some API that allow for an interaction, of their own system with the competitors. Okay, this raised this issue of this relation. I mentioned also in my introductory remarks this issue of the interplay between interoperability and cybersecurity. Okay. Now, think about this. Many of us have an iPhone or a smartphone, and definitely, I mean, the smartphone does not maybe can help, but it's not fundamental in running, for instance, a reservation system at the airport or something else. But the system instead, like the Windows and so on, that on which companies rely heavily. How can this system really be open and take advantage of this issue of interoperability? Because, for instance, like the Commission asked, like I ask WhatsApp to be interoperable, with other messaging system, for instance. This didn't have too much, follows in terms of initiative, in terms of practical implication. In other words, I mean, this, it's, I mean, what is, how we can guarantee that this, we make interoperable system, but also security, it's to some extent, it's preserved, and so we are able really to create API that are functional in this direction.
Well, I think even above the, we'll say the product architecture or the design piece, just having a secure configuration by design. For example, when you put a product out, maybe even in Office 365, a lot of the functions are open. Let's just say any user can do a certain high-level function. I'm making a very big generalization, but there's a lot of things that are, we'll say, not secure by default, just by when you first turn on the software. So you have to go and you have to look for those things. Some of which can be just on by default, right? And that's the really simple things that the provider can do. And it's the same thing for security product manufacturers, like Trellix and myself, being transparent about the updates that you're doing. So one of the reasons in the CrowdStrike situation was those critical updates were not really controlled by the user or by the organization. So that's a choice made by the manufacturer. They have their reasons. But the better way is to be transparent, okay? Letting customers know and make the choice, okay, can I control that at this time or a time of my choosing, and based on the threats and risks that I face. NIST 2 drives a very much a risk management culture, which is really great and moving things forward. But just having that secure by design in the manufacturing side, or the security and the productivity software vendors will be very helpful. Interoperability, I think there's been a lot of strides towards that. even with Microsoft, there are secure ways to access the sensitive pieces, and I think having standards that allow you to other providers to perhaps easily provide security on top of those environments will be there. But it does come down to sort of a resilient by design approach within the manufacturers.
Do you have a comment?
Yeah, very quickly, going back to my issue of standards, but that was the previous speaker prompted me. I think one thing that's important that we see in compliance and that manufacturers ask a lot is the composability of standards, reusability, that you can take depending on on the product, depending on the service you're putting out on the market, that you can use a bit of the harmonized standard for the Radio Equipment Directive, a bit of the Cybersecurity Act scheme. And this is something that is important in order to also to allow for that innovation, but also to a large extent for the interoperability, because not the standards are great, but it's also not a one-size-fits-all situation. So I think the flexibility from the regulators, from the market, from the surveillance authorities, also flexibility from the tech companies to provide certifications against composable standards is something that is important in order to allow for the market to flourish a bit more.
Okay. Question there.
Yeah, thank you. So the first,
Can you introduce yourself?
excuse me?
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, yes, of course. My name is Chris. I'm a consultant. I work on cyber policy and regulation. So the first part is about the updates, automated updates. And there seems to be a little bit of a juxtaposition, because one of the most common security advice that you give to companies, especially lesser mature cyber companies, is always choose automated updates. Because it is one of the best ways to make sure that the software you use is patched against known or unknown vulnerabilities before they become exploited. So how do you make that judgment call whether your organization should choose automated updates or actually spend time and resources managing and deciding every update? So that would be the first part. And the second part would be, we talk a lot about single vendors and that being an issue, but in the intro we heard that opening up the kernel had created a $15 billion market with many, many vendors providing this kind of endpoint security. So is this actually a problem that reflects that there weren't enough vendors to choose from? My guess would be that you can use any number of them. So how does this relate directly to the problem of reduced competition in a market?
I can take that first if you don't mind. Thank you, Chris. That was a really excellent question. I think the case about the updates is about risk management. It's not really new, honestly, but there's the mindsets that were discussed, the efficiency, the sort of outsourcing of the responsibility in some ways. Maybe people say, well, just take all automatic updates on all systems, for example. That's not a good, I would never recommend that to a customer. So that's all about your risk decisions. But if the product doesn't allow that, that's a different story. That's a different problem. And we think that needs to be fixed and be aware. So customers, given the choice, they make a risk decision. Other things, it could be compensating controls. So if it's not all about endpoints and iPhones and end user devices, there's other systems, the critical systems that Bernard mentioned, and many of those are manufacturing. There are other controls that are even better suited to protect the environment. So I think those things are important. The risk decision about the criticality of what you're protecting, other controls that you have, and even knowledge. And I do think the security products that are out there have to think about that and give customers, the choice, the transparency, and if they want to do offline testing, for example, on updates, that they have that ability, right? And maybe it's not by default, but they choose that as long as they have that choice. And then the second piece, I think maybe the others could handle the competition piece more effectively.
Sorry, Christian is already connected, Xavier. So maybe we can give the floor to Christian to get the view of the Commission, if he's still there. Christian, can you hear us? Christian? We can see you, but we cannot hear you. I don't know. Can you hear us? No. Yes, but we cannot hear you. Maybe get out, get in again. I don't know. This is the basic safety.
Is this better?
Yes, now. Okay.
Now you can hear. Excellent. Okay.
So, Christian, go ahead.
Well, first of all, my sincere apologies for not being able to join today. I think you can imagine it's a very busy period across the Commission at the moment where we're going through some changes. So I had to change plans at the very last minute. I have had the privilege of being able to follow the discussion for the last 20 minutes, and I was very pleased to read your post, Lorenzo, on this incident. I don't really have much to add to what's already been said. I mean, from the perspective of the Commission, as you would expect me to say, we have been investing a lot, along with the legislators, in putting in place a framework for ensuring that citizens and businesses are protected against cybersecurity risks. We often think about cyber attacks and malicious activities, and that's obviously more of a concern than ever, given the geopolitical situation and in particular the world that we're living in since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago. But cyber risks, cyber incidents, NIS incidents also include ones which are not malicious, but they occur through human error or procedural error, or even through natural natural events, which is why we have the all hazards approach to cybersecurity under NIS 2. The main message I wanted to pass today was that we've just had formal agreement, formal adoption of the Cyber Resilience Act. Next week, this week is the deadline for transposition of the NIS 2 directive, which requires all medium-sized, larger entities from 18 critical sectors to take security measures and report security incidents, which could be any event, as I've just said. And in the Cyber Resilience Act, we've got, for the first time in the world, a set of rules for strengthening supply chain security. This has already been mentioned by your panelists. For all hardware and software which is made available in the EU, and that includes provisions on how products need to be tested before they're released into the market. So we're going to have a new commission soon. I think if you talk to member states, you'll know that the focus is going to be on transposition and on implementation of the rules that we already have. But as far as the CrowdStrike incident is concerned, we are still trying to learn lessons from what happened. I think events like this are excellent in terms of bringing together different perspectives, and we'd certainly be willing to continue this discussion with you as we go forward.
Okay, but I think we can agree overall, I mean, that we don't need additional regulation because, uh, at least, in the EU, we have both NIS, NIS2, and also the CRA that is offering concrete instrument path, to approach not only cybersecurity incident, but also other type of incident. But I want to ask you, I mean, on this issue that was mentioned before, on automated or not update, software update, do you think that this idea of giving companies the opt-in instead of opt-out choice, deciding if they for critical product, I mean, if it would be possible under the CRA, in other words, to allow opt-in for company to decide if they want an automated update or not.
Yeah, I mean, without going into the details of what the CRA says, but I think it's basically a question of accountability, and that they need to take responsibility for the for the products that are and for the hardware and software that's being deployed on the market across the whole supply chain. So I depending on how you read the CRA, I mean, I'm not sure whether automated or non-automated is the issue. I think it's the case that they have to take responsibility for the decisions that they make as a business.
Okay. Do we have another question here? Just to close, we mentioned also some some analysts say that well, it's true that there is the software monoculture, but it's also an issue related to the fact that maybe some companies were not prepared in general to this type of outage. So this issue of using a recovery mechanism, defensive programming, contingency plans. Okay, by the way, the needs to require, to have this type of risk assessment, also to have contingency plan. What do you think about this? There are also responsibility on the company side.
Definitely, and I think this is a constant improvement is needed in cyber risk incident response. That could, and just think about this. This could have been a ransomware incident. I think everyone's familiar with what ransomware can do. It can be destructive. It can lead to theft and loss, and especially now in almost all of those situations, it's destructive and theft at the same time, or at least that's a major goal. So that could have very well been the situation. So your ability, how are you going to operate, and how are you going to prepare to that? You have to do preparation exercises. I think on the scale that happened with, say, a Delta, okay, they're hard to have full redundancy and hard to fully prepare for that kind of scale, but they have to be. And I'm sure that companies like that are thinking about it now. What if we had a catastrophic, problem? They're really used to preparing for a small number of incidents, maybe in unimportant systems, but they basically doing regular exercises. There's lots of best practices available for cyber incidents, for IT outage incidents, and doing those as part of continuity planning is super important. I don't see that is actually on the mind of most companies. I think the first thing is, how do they find that incident? In this case, it was easy because it was down. But how do you find an incident first? That's where a lot of people have their priorities. But once you do find that incident, how are you going to respond? Sometimes that's a second priority in many organizations, and I hope that changes, or significantly improves over time.
So, if if you have which suggestion will give your company or the company in general, to try to get over what happened with this outage? What will be the first recommendation that we'll give?
Oh, so for me, I think it goes a little bit in line with what Mo was mentioning. Preparedness is crucial. Also, educating employees about how to better react to these kinds of failures. But we also shouldn't forget that not all companies are big companies and can have the tools to actually be prepared. A lot of small and medium enterprises are also having to implement all of these cybersecurity rules, and preventing attacks and system outages is crucial for them, but it is also a huge burden. So making sure that the rules that exist are clear, that are effectively applied and easy to interpret and implement, I think is also crucial.
Michael?
Yeah, I think in a way, enabling or empowering companies with continuous surveillance is perhaps one of the most powerful tools. When I speak to TIC Council members about this, when they carry out projects for the radio equipment directive, the manufacturers have sometimes some sort of reluctance to this continuous surveillance by conformity assessment bodies, or in this case by notified bodies. And and this is just some of these simple tools, and perhaps again I'm too naive, but some of these simple tools that can help ensure that all data that is provided in a software update is accurate and is up to date. And this helps with the upkeep and with the trust in the technology. We're not talking about having a recertification done on a yearly basis, but just having this continuous surveillance, I think, would be quite powerful. And then, I mean, going back to my original point about opening, I think the obligations under the Cyber Resilience Act for the reporting of incidents is actually in a way a quite powerful tool to encourage, to put it diplomatically, companies to share. Because I think here we're not necessarily talking about secrets of the trade the way we are doing for very high technology equipment. I think here companies can most certainly learn from one another, can learn from what went wrong, learn from what went right to a certain extent. And having fora where this can be done, regulatory sandboxes, for example, is something that is really quite useful. And I'm happy that you also invited the academic community in this discussion, because I think this, the point that was made also highlights the extent to which we can, and I say this with a grain of salt, living in Brussels, but we can live in a bubble as well when manufacturers devise their products. So I think here, thinking a bit outside of this cybersecurity bubble can be very useful, and opening up what you do to third parties can be very, very helpful.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think there was an extremely informative event, and so I would like to thank the speakers, the audience, and also Trellix that allowed us to do this event. Thank you very much. And now let's have a lunch.